Um, so, we talked this morning about blockchain. We talked this morning about AI, IoT. A very beautiful example of what we can do with AI here has been presented. And I think that now what we want to do together is maybe to take the full picture. How is all this going to interact with each other? What are the use cases that are going to emerge, and how are these use cases going to interact with each other? And so what we are going to do for the less than 2 hours that we have remaining together is that we are going to look into one specific aspect, which is the one of smart cities, which is, as it was said this morning, one of the likely outputs that will be most impacted in the next 3 to 5 years. And so we want to have a discussion on this. And then we will be having a second discussion more on how to enable this convergence, both on the technical aspect and on the legal and regulatory aspect. So to introduce this session on Smart City, we are going to take a specific example and one approach that is not in Europe, but that is in Abu Dhabi. So please welcome Nabil and his team here on stage to talk about what is happening right now in Abu Dhabi, and then we'll be moving on to a discussion altogether. Thanks.
Afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Ludovic. My name is Nabil Manzoor, and I'm Managing Director of Berkeley Research Group. At BRG, we are sort of practitioners in economic growth reforms, regulatory frameworks, and public policy reforms and issues. We practically work with government entities pretty much from the US, Europe, Middle East, and Asia Pac. And over the past 15 months, we started a journey, with the large stakeholder group, the government entities within Abu Dhabi, with this vision to demystify smart cities, because they've been living under the shadows of their neighbor and the cousin Dubai, who have been the leading light in the smart city, and it depends who you speak to and what information you get from that. But this really was a mission to. Can you hear me? Okay, good. Sorry, I'll turn to get a bit more closer. So this really is really to demystify smart cities and look at the impact it would have, whether that's to do with economic growth, whether that's to do with the socio-economic impact on the society as a whole, but also look at what technology and the enablers are made available and how they could be used. How the existing infrastructure could be used as well. But more importantly, the lens we really applied to that is one of citizen-centric. What does that do to public? What does it mean for public services? So what we'll try to do, we'll share some of our learnings from this ongoing piece of work, and we're really hoping that we'll offer a slightly different vantage point to some of the conversations you've been hearing all this afternoon, a slightly different perspective, and I really hope that all the attendees over here will allow you to sort of get into the mindsets and the heads of policymakers and what the government individuals, particularly the forward-thinking, what they really are thinking. And it's also a call for, subsequent to that, for any ideas that you could contribute to that, which we'll be very happy to facilitate. Without much further ado, I'll pass on to my colleagues, Tom and Kieran, to take you through this. Just a brief mention that we worked in partnership with our partners, Mishcon de Rea, who are a prestigious law firm from the regulatory standpoint, who contributed this piece of work, continue to do so. So Tom's here representing that. So over to you guys.
Thank you very much, Nabil. I just get the clicker. Good, thank you. I'm Kieran Brown from the Berkeley Research Group. Important to note, I'm not a technologist. I'm actually, economics is my background, corporate strategy and public management. So we're going to have quite a different conversation with you, reflecting on our experiences supporting the government of Abu Dhabi. But we thought first, this morning we've really looked at a lot of quite complex technology questions and interoperability constraints. But I thought it would be good to talk about government bodies and what fundamental questions they're grappling with. So moving to sort of 10,000 feet. And around the world, our clients are concerned with how will disruptive technologies impact the government, impact citizens and private firms. And what should our role be as the regulator or the government body to support and safeguard this process? I mean, we're talking about Abu Dhabi today, but these concerns are not Middle East only. I mean, just reflecting on a piece of research IE put out last week, 3,500 Europeans were surveyed, including the UK, on governance and sentiment towards advanced technologies. I thought I'd just share 3 statistics with you that hammer home this point around society's concerns about advanced technologies. 67% said that the governance of new emerging and advanced technologies, along with climate change, was the biggest challenge the European Union has to face. 56% said they are worried or very worried of a future where robots and advanced technologies diffuse too quickly and take over human work. 70% of Europeans said the government should take immediate and strong actions, policy measures or regulation to limit the negative effects of advanced technologies. So the hearts and minds argument, someone made the point earlier about awareness, is critical because these sentiments and these concerns will trickle into politics, and that politics will trickle into policy and regulation that might not be fit for purpose, and innovation could suffer. And I think it's important that our clients, governments around the world, are not interested particularly in technology themselves or the interoperability issues themselves. The issues that keep them up at night are those macro issues of job creation and economic growth, aging populations, healthcare and paying for it, not to mention security.
Yeah, absolutely. And building on that, I think these tech-focused forums are incredibly valuable, and they're incredibly important to make sure that I'm a lawyer. I like to know the detail, and I'm also a self-confessed geek, so I like to understand the detail of how these things work. And it's important that we have the framework that builds the interoperability and the scalability at a technical level. But it's very, very important. The population don't care. To use an example, people aren't going to use 5G because it's able to tap into a broader range of spectrum bands. They're just not. They're going to use it because it makes their phone quicker. That's the reality of it. And I think we just need to make sure that in all of our conversations, certainly publicly, these forums are fantastic. But in terms of our public-facing communications, they've got to be laser focused on the issues we're facing and the solutions we're proposing. How are they going to address job creation? How is it going to fuel economic growth? How is it going to benefit healthcare?
In short, we've found that advanced technologies and the narrative and the conversation around them has been inherently linked to a very important mission. So a societally and politically relevant mission. When advanced technologies have been tied to that, the attitude and the politics and the policy position has been much more favourable and much more positive. And we get on to the smart city agenda. Cities is where the future playing field of the world will be. 1.5 million people move to cities every week. By 2025, 60% of global GDP will be coming out of cities. Cities is where innovation will live. It's where the majority of the world will live. It's where the action will happen. And in our research, sort of particularly around mega cities, and particularly in Asia, where internet and mobile diffusion is high, the population demographies are young, these are the places where advanced technologies are taking shape and moving the quickest. And the golden thread in smart cities is data and citizens and their experiences. And that's certainly where the perspective we've come from and the questions we ask and the sessions we facilitate, certainly with Abu Dhabi, was what's the citizen experience? What's the desired experience? What's the quality of life experience? And the development of a compelling mission which ties advanced technologies and their living standards together.
And let's be very clear, smart cities aren't new. we've been using technologies to optimize our traffic lights and monitor our waste disposal efficiencies for years. And I appreciate there was a quite interesting debate on the taxonomy of these emerging technologies earlier, but both of those things could come under a pretty loose, vague definition of IoT or AI technologies. We've recently advised HM Land Registry in the UK on the first UK-based transfer of land using a blockchain solution. And that's great, that's really exciting, and it's something we're very, very proud about. But all of these solutions, the traffic lights, the land registry, the waste management, they're all existing in a very, very siloed manner. And I appreciated the speaker before us said that, and alluded to that, it only gets exciting, it only gets really valuable, interesting when all of these siloed bodies start talking to each other. And it starts to become more of a living, breathing, giant ecosystem, very much with that notion of a smart city, again, speaking as a lawyer, almost as its own distinct legal entity, sitting in the middle of it, living, breathing, and evolving with it. And that, to my mind, and to our mind, is the underlying blockchain comes in. It enables that communication, it enables that transfer of data between the various currently siloed stakeholders, and allows us to have better data collected from more varied sources, and probably going back to our focus on the problem and focus on the solution, better outcomes for the populace.
And there was a great point made earlier by the speaker before us on it's not just about connected devices. And actually, the focus should be sort of the second and third horizon on intelligent systems. And from a municipal government or even a federal level government perspective, our clients are saying this is really valuable as a learning experience as well. We continue to be shocked is the wrong word, but we continue to be surprised at how few and how shallow the learning loops are between citizens and their activities and the policy and decision making that comes in top down.
Saddened, I think, is the word.
Saddened is the word. Yeah. Curious and saddened. And how does this all fit into the bigger picture? Basically, the key message here is that the Smart City program that we've been working with in Abu Dhabi has been an excellent coordinating mechanism and a fantastic program and a broad mission for a lot of people working on different technologies in the Emirate to come together, and a lot of different policymakers to come together under a similar mission with common goals.
And I think the easiest way of I like this graphic. I think in our mind, a smart city is comprised of two component parts. There's a vibrant, innovative private sector, and that's a well-trodden path of how to incentivize that and how to grow that. It's favourable tax regimes. It's the availability of highly skilled workforces, and we're not gonna go there today. That's a well-trodden path. But the beating heart of it is the central government and how they set directive, permissive, positive regulation laws and policies, how they invest in digital infrastructure, and how they lead by example through the provision and development of e-government services. And all of that relies on this notion of utilising advanced technologies. And what we've got on the screen is very much 5 technologies side by side, which is how we traditionally see these technologies existing. But it's not really the way we frame it and the way we try and take our client on a journey and discuss with them. We don't see blockchain sitting alongside machine learning, AI, IoT. We see it as a horizontal, probably alongside 5G, that underpins those pieces, that improves the data integrity, improves the transferability of data, and allows those really exciting, interesting verticals, the AI, the machine learning, the IoT, to just do their thing. I think if we were to change this graphic, we would probably have blockchain as a horizontal sitting like that, and the other verticals going vertically towards the end user, the citizen, the product consumer.
And the characteristics and we'll get to the specific blockchain points on the next slide, but those data integrity characteristics and benefits of blockchain have been very compelling for our client and continue to make them curious about the potential benefits the technology has for the city as a whole. And from a management perspective, several major challenges exist for the Smart Cities program, not with our client, but I imagine these are the same issues for cities all over the world. The data architecture is incredibly fractured and diffuse, and entities don't like to share. Multi-party collaboration and coordination is very, very difficult, particularly inside the government, let alone with outside vendors and suppliers and technologists. The transparency and accounting of the benefits realized as part of the Smart Cities program, which entity claims benefit for that KPI. 6 entities work together to achieve that. So attribution and transparency of benefits is a concern. The fact that so many channels are still not digital and paper is incredibly pervasive, and the talent and the technical deficit. The capacity, the digital capacity, let alone the digital capabilities, tend to be much lower and thinner on the ground. And there's a series of issues. I mean, in the UK, for example, there's a great hollowing out of capability and capacity as more and more things were privatized. As a result of that, and the same as with our client, we have less of that capability in-house. So the journey we went on with Abu Dhabi, and the goals we set, or the mission that was set from a very high level, were priorities around citizen happiness and living standards, digitization and smarter government services, and a place where talent wants to live and innovation wants to grow. And the how, of course, our program of work looked at around the digital infrastructure provision, the adoption of advanced technologies, and most critically, where we'll dwell on now, is the development of strategic policy guidance, a policy directive. We've started with blockchain, and very shortly down the track, we'll be moving forward to IoT and AI.
Conscious of time, we don't want to stay up here for much longer and take much more of your time. But I think that the big thing we just want to stress on this Abu Dhabi slide is this is Abu Dhabi. It isn't one size fits all, and I think it's important that every single government asks themselves, what does success look like for them? For Abu Dhabi, it was happiness. For an emerging financial centre, it might be to incentivise more business in the area. For Papua New Guinea, 80% of their citizens are unbanked. It might just be about creating some sort of identity management platform that gives people access to welfare. I think the key point we just want to make clear here is that every government needs to ask themselves, what do they want out of this tech? Keep it on the solution, keep it on the mission, and pursue the tech accordingly.
And just specifically on blockchain, what we've supported the Abu Dhabi government with is we've developed a set of common legal working definitions. We've developed some guiding principles for how the government should approach adoption. We've researched into possible economic and social impacts the government needs to consider. We've looked at the competing regulatory frameworks and approaches around the world, particularly in the UK, Malta, Bermuda and Gibraltar. With Tom's support and Mishkon's support, we've looked at specific legal considerations, GDPR, consumer rights, property, IP. We've developed a set of standardized use case evaluation criteria and a roadmap and supporting governance structure for the government to roll out in the next couple of years. And so finally, we wanted to dwell on some of those guiding principles, which have been sort of mandated across the central government at least. And I think the hope is they'll be directional to private firms. And Tom's going to talk a little bit about the role of government and oversight and the competing theories on how to regulate this.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I want to keep it relatively succinct, but I think there's a misunderstanding that regulation is a bogeyman and that it will stifle innovation and it will crush innovation. It's just not true. I think what the space is needed, is craving, is blessing. is direction, is leadership from the policymakers, the regulators, the legislators. The English common law system is over 1,000 years old. That's a lot of case law. That's a lot on paper of regulation. It's still seen as one of the most attractive places to do company business in the world because the legislation is drafted as being permissive and flexible, and it's interpreted and applied in a commercially sensible and practical and predictable manner. And I think that's the yes.
So I'm just conscious that we've taken up a fair amount of time. So I think we will be around and happy to take any questions or any follow-ups. I just want to thank you, PC and the Observatory team for the opportunity. So, yeah.
Thank you, and happy to answer questions afterwards.
Thank you very much. Please, a big round of applause for presentation of smart cities. So I propose that as the discussion that we are going to have starting from now is a discussion between all of the participants. We keep questions and the topics that have not been covered as a discussion between the public and the presenters to the working session. And again, I just want to remind you that this part of the session, we are only here to help drive the discussion, but the discussion is actually made by you from this point. Just want. Donc, so, sorry, my French came back. So, yeah, so sorry, you wanted to.
Will there be questions on the presentation that we just heard? Do we have a time for that?
So basically, some of the aspects that was discussed, we continue to discuss them during this working session on smart cities. And so there will be opportunity to, again, talk about the use cases and, of course, have the answers from the team that presented, but just being conscious of the time, I just propose that we move on. Again, this has been very well and greatly presented before. This is a small variant of it, but basically what we are seeing with smart cities is that most of the use cases where we see implementation of blockchain, AI, and IoT revolves around 6 main sectors. And these 6 sectors have been announced multiple times during the morning sessions and also during the presentation right before. And these are around governance, the management of resources. We talked about energy this morning. We talked a lot about it. Mobility, which will be actually one of the aspects where we'll be diving in. The different spaces and how to incentivize virtuous behaviors in these different spaces. Value. We hear a lot in these moments about how we are going to use digital assets. And this morning was a great example of it. And we can have these applications into real estate, into banking, into insurance, and that are coming and that are part of this smart city framework. And finally, wellness, everything related to healthcare, everything related to food traceability, of course, which are very important aspects. And so what we propose to you today is that for this working session, we are going to present you with a framework, a very basic example, but that example will serve as a basis for discussion on what are the hurdles that we should solve today in order to make this smart city happen. And so I will let Claire present what this use case is about, and we will then move on to a discussion on that.
So it's a very simple use case concerning mobility and public transportation. So I don't know if it's the same in every city, but in Paris, when they try to improve the mobility system and the public transportation, they make little survey in the subway and the bus for knowing how many people are in the bus. And we were thinking actually by combining blockchain and artificial intelligence and IoT, we could create a system when actually the bus and the train would have like sensitive capture for capturing the data, the car could be like connected, the city infrastructure could also gather some data, who could be all encrypted in blockchain and using the artificial intelligence for analyzing them and redistributing, adding more public transport, giving other indication to the GPS. And this is a very just simple example of what we could do for a smart city thanks to combining the free technology And it really appears that we need to gather this technology, because if you just use, it's already the case, but if you just use artificial intelligence, how can you ensure that the privacy of the data coming from the users? And if you just use blockchain for gather the data, how can you get the data at the beginning? How can you cap the data? And if you just use IoT without the rest, how can you analyze the data in the right way and also ensure the privacy? So it's a very simple example. If you have any comments on it, if you think it's something that we could actually realize at the present time, or if it's technically not possible, or if you have any question.
So basically, what we are presenting here is that thanks to these 3 layers of technology, in the end, what you are going to achieve in terms of mobility is a change in how the public transportation system works. And this public transportation system will be adapted to the needs for the specific day and to the needs depending on what is actually happening in the city. Then you will have alternative roads will be proposed to the people who don't take public transportation but who take their own means of transportation. And you will also have the system inside the city infrastructure that will be adapting to the system. And the question that we want to ask to you here is what here in the system is preventing us today from implementing this solution. I will take just one simple example. Today, if you want to implement the system, the first thing that you will have to manage is to have access to data. And so what we are actually seeing today is that there is a lot of data silos where the data from the public transportation system is not in all cities open and accessible to everyone, open to private parties, but also to other public transportation systems. And on the other side, the different competitors in the market from the private perspective are not sharing their data because they are not incentivized to do so. And so the question here is, on that specific example, data silo seems to be a very huge problem. What are the other problems that we need to solve in order to make that vision happening on this simple example? The floor is yours.
Thank you for posing the scene, setting the scene in a quite clear way. My question would be a bit more perspective. So today, okay, data are not available, but what do you think that financial incentives or which kind of other incentives would be really the right ones to have this data not being kept in silos? Because we know that blockchain would be the notarization layer and and ensuring probably not the privacy in the sense how data are used or reused, but what's the incentives for private sector to share this data? And what this kind of convergence of the 3 technologies can bring into the discussion.
So for the answers, you are the experts and you are the ones answering. So I think the question here is really on business model and how we can make sure that incentivization is well structured and well managed. Do you have, for example, examples here in the room of systems that are working and that are monetizing data? Yeah, please.
So there's something called People Me, right? So they give you discount if you walk by the flower store and they let you use your data. They send you a notification that you get 10-20% discount on, you know, Starbucks or whatever flowers that you want to buy. So that's something that you're giving back. I mean, that was the original idea of when their utility tokens was that we can use you do something for us, we give you a token back, and that's why, and the price is going to go up in the secondary market, so everybody benefits out of it. So that tokenization, that part would be something, but then you go to security. You know, there's a much more behind it, but that was the original idea for having a tokenization to pay back developers when they invest their time in to help you out.
But is it really disrupting the way we do work today with advertisement?
I think it's more about, you said, how you can get people giving up their data.
My issue here is that we will be kind of obliged under pressure of advertisement to be providing our data. So what will be the difference from today? I'm just being a bit...
Yeah, that's fine, but I mean, that's your choice though, right? If you don't like to you don't like to deal with it, you don't need to accept it. It's
Just wondering about how much choice do we really have as consumers today, and keep.
What I would like to add also is that the worst incentive is an incentive that is not adapt to you. When I'm driving using Waze and I have an ad for McDonald's, I never go to McDonald's.
But
Yeah, I think IA could provide also a way to better target what we can provide as a business to people who are interested in sharing their data. And so it's possible to have a forms where we can ask what they want, but we can also propose based on what they have already answered and based on the concrete behavior. So mixing IoT to have information, to have like a first set of information, mixing AI to analyze what type of habits they have during the consuming processes, and blockchain to automatize the processes could be also a way to go.
We're again jumping quite deep in technology, but I see two things missing. One, who is going to govern the system? Who is going to decide how to adjust the traffic lights? Is it going to be everybody? Will be quite interesting, I think. I live on the A12 where now we have traffic jams just like for an hour just because they adjusted the traffic lights. That's one thing, governance. And the second thing is who is going to pay for it. This is strategy of the commons. Everybody has a benefit, but nobody is going to feed the cow. It has to be built, which is a cost, which has to be bear by somebody, and it's not telling me who or what. And then it has to be maintained, and then it has to be updated. And who is going to pay for all that? The traffic lights because they let me through, my car because I drive it, me as a citizen, which is the case anyway because I pay taxes. So for me, always is two things who kill a business case in blockchain. We have to decide how to decide, that's governance, and we have to decide how to pay, that's a business model. That's the thing that stops such an implementation.
That's a very interesting point, and you are asking very interesting questions. Do you have answers to them? Do you have an opinion on that? And do you have examples, practical examples of implementations?
Well, I've done a few dozen blockchain projects, and most of them actually stop, or drift whenever they meet those questions. So now we try to get governance done first to decide how to decide, because it's important just to know what the majority means or what the majority wants. And when we know how to decide, then we decide on the business model, who is going to pay for everything and how is going to be sustainable. So there are projects going live, yeah, but I don't know if they're really the cases you're looking for. They don't involve traffic lights.
Maybe one way as blockchain is to start by being not too visionary. For instance, if you take the mobility case, let's try to break it down into can you be easing the way in which you hire a car, and then you know where there's parking space free for you. And if you hire a car per minute, it will be relevant for you. So the incentive that you get is that you'll pay less your bill at the end if you find the right parking car. And that's connected, it's IoT, it's kind of infrastructure that show you that you have this parking space there or not. So can we try to break this down into smaller pieces to build the whole house and the whole city? Because otherwise it seems quite ambitious.
One of the answers to your question, I suppose, is, well, who runs a city? Normally, the municipality. So who pays for it? The municipality. So which is everyone, basically, in the city put together. I mean, it's supposed to be an entity that represents, the good of everyone in the city, which also answers the question of how do you incentivize private companies to give their data? You force them. You make a law that says, if you want to do business in our city, we have access to your data.
I actually do agree on that. It's one of the ways to get it going. It's just enforce it.
It can be fair. If you can say if you want to do business in the city, then we get access to your data to help the city run better. It's not a horrible proposition. But however, it does raise another question, which is why use a blockchain in the first place then? Because if it's the municipality running the system, then why not just use a database and store everything in it and be done with it?
I think, sorry, just to interject, I think the reality is that whilst the municipality is running it, that municipality is made up of a number of constituent parts, not all of whom trust each other or like each other, frankly, even though they're supposed to be on the same page. And I think sometimes having some sort of centralized database helps there.
Well, that's a good argument. I mean, one of the main arguments for blockchains is when you have different parties that don't necessarily trust each other and need to come to an agreement. So that can be a good argument for a blockchain, but then it means the blockchain necessarily has to be public so people outside the system can see it, and there's got to be transparency and everything. If it's a consortium thing, it's going to be a bit different, I guess.
I guess if as a citizen I am comfortable that I trust the municipality, then the case is only that the municipality constituent parts themselves trust each other, and so it's a semi-private blockchain that way. It's public to those municipality entities, but publicly, as in you and I, man on the street, private. It's who you're opening it up to.
So what I'm not sure I get here is you're saying basically there's a case for blockchains because the members of the municipality don't trust each other, but the outside public should trust them even though.
Should is another question. Do, yes, I think.
Yes, just a comment. When we're talking about public services and how the public sector will procure these technologies, we are, some of you mentioned before, lacking awareness, meaning that the people in the public sector who have to buy these services need to be aware or have a minimal level of knowledge about the potential of this technology. And what is happening today in the UK, for example, is that the government is providing training on all the various emerging technologies to make sure that when the IT vendors will knock at the door, they actually know what they're talking about and will be able to evaluate the various solutions and alternatives that those vendors will provide. So I think that the public sector also has an important role to play here, especially then if you're talking about policy and governance, and therefore it's paramount importance that they actually receive in training. They really need to understand. I'm not saying that we will all become developers, but it is really important because those technologies will become part of our life as mobile phones are now, and therefore without the minimal level of knowledge, there's no way we can really shape good quality policies and governance.
So maybe to summarize a bit what I heard from now. So education definitely is a part of it. From what I hear on the other discussions that happened previously, so the first thing that you actually need to implement this, and maybe to take the example from Chiara, even smaller one to break it down, of the car that is actually looking for a parking spot. You first need to have data about what are the parking slots that are currently available, and data about what is the current state of the traffic and what are the current cars that are looking for this parking slot. Then you also need for your solution to have strong governance, and the governance that is actually settled. You need to know how you are going to interact between the car company, the city administration that is running the parking slots. And finally, you need a business model to know how you are going to incentivize the different actors. So this is what I heard from here, and I'm happy to add anything that I would have missed, but just want to bring back technology on these discussions. So for incentivization, okay, maybe a good way to incentivize them is to proceed to micropayments. This is a simple use case leveraging blockchain. We can definitely do that. getting data about what are the parking slots that are currently available. This is a simple use case for IoT. Deciding what car will receive an incentive, this is a simple case for AI. So here my question is, how do we make sure that this element happens, and how do we connect that with the technology based on what we just discussed before? Yeah.
So one thing I'm missing in the graphic is the people, the citizens, because my interest as citizen is coming from point A to point B, and I don't care about taking the bike or the velo or a tram or what kind of transportation. And if I get a way how to make this data secure but public, then I think this whole system can work. So that the system knows which citizen wants to travel from which point to which other point, and then you can give them suggestions what should be the best way, what should be the best transportation for this, and yeah, and then I as citizen also get a reward, because I travel very fast from point A to point B, and perhaps I take the car, perhaps I take the train.
So maybe what we can say in addition is that maybe the incentive is not only in terms of money, but in terms of efficiency that the citizens may gain, and this would be an added value that would be presented to them, and to make sure that they are using the solution. Am I understanding you right?
Yes, it's why do you use Google Maps? Because I know the traffic jams, and Google knows where I'm traveling to. So you just have to bring this use case to the blockchain and AI. So you already have AI there.
So do you need a blockchain for that? Because so we were talking, for example, we were talking, for example, previously about governance, and we were saying, what's the point of using blockchain here? When we were talking about this use case, yes, micropayments could be done using blockchain, but governance, we don't necessarily want to add technology where it's not needed. So in that specific case, is it needed?
The question is, do you need self-sovereign ID or self-sovereign data? Yes, then you can use the blockchain, and you can really put there your destination, your actual destination, and then everybody can use it over the blockchain, but you're aware of your data.
I do quite agree with what you've said. I think that's the real question. But if we take the blockchain as a kind of public good, I don't know if it will be the municipality to provide for this or not, but if we take this as an extra layer where you ensure that your data is traced, whatever the use it is done, and eventually monetize if this is one of the objectives, then it becomes a kind of public goods that could be handled in a more common societal way. And there you add value to the use cases, to the Google Maps use case.
Yeah, there was recently at the Parliament a driving future platform, AI Park, which is supported by Deutsche Bahn startup hub, and their exact application was this. It was using GPS data, showing where you could park in cities, parks and ride, and then just adding the blockchain element, because they're already using AI and IoT, simply kind of democratizing the spillovers through a central trusted body to allow others to leverage that data that's being created. It's exactly that. So.
Yeah, just one comment.
Sir, Arist.
I think instead of asking the question, do we need blockchain or do we need this technology, we should first think about what this technology brings. Blockchain is bringing immutability of the data and date of proof of the data. If we need those two, if we need immutability and integrity of the data more than what a Google Drive is doing, then we should use blockchain. But if we don't need it, if it's not a critical data, then we don't need blockchain. So that's my first remark. And my second remark is, I think adoption and mass adoption of these kind of cases, we need to have first the answer to the question, what kind of problem we try to address. Is it traffic jam? Is it find a parking spot? Is it pollution? Because the stop and go is more polluting than just having a flow of cars. And then once we have the problem, we need to see if this, with the existing technology, we can solve that issue. And if not, then we bring what the new technology can bring on top of what we already have. Because trying to start with the technology and then push use case, I think this is where we're going to try to think, or maybe think, that it's going to solve issues that actually we cannot solve. And I think blockchain has been seen as we're going to solve all the problems. It's going to lead to a solution to all problems like nutrition or everything. And then I think we come back to the stage where blockchain has some promises. Let's take the blockchain where it should be and try to solve all the issues with what the other technology can bring.
I have another type of remark, and I know this will sound really like a legal comment, but I already read papers about it that in smart cities particularly, the use of technology can give advantage to certain part of the citizens, usually the younger ones, millennials. So maybe in terms of a reward system that we will implement into this particular use case, for instance, we may think about proper ways how to do it so that we don't actually discriminate part of the citizens that may not be so familiar with the technologies. And I'm not saying that I am pro this conversation, but this is what has been already discussed in other platforms. So just.
Hello, Chai Wu from Digital Awareness. And in our federation, we are a lot in touch with municipalities, and in order to have smart cities, we need municipalities to work together. And there is a functionality within blockchain that's often forgotten. It is the possibility of being anonymous and still identified. And we have been approached by municipalities which were very interested into that specific feature, being able to collaborate, voting, and communicating on things while still not being identified personally. So, for instance, if I'm a local politician, I would like to be able to communicate and work with another politician from another municipality, but I don't want them to know that I'm that specific person who made that point, while still being authenticated. And so a lot of municipalities actually are interested into that specific feature. So I think that's a good use case for blockchain.
So to better understand, what would be the drawback of giving an identity and the need for pseudonymization in that aspect? What would be the drawback of, yeah?
Well, actually, as a few people mentioned earlier, a lot of them, while being on the same page, they don't like each other. They don't want the other ones to know they voted that particular rule, while still wanting to do so, but they don't want it to go public. So a lot of people want to collaborate, but they don't want to be identified. They want to be certified, so they have the authority to do so, but they don't want other partners to know they have been the ones doing so. Yeah, I can give you very practical. Sorry. We have actually here in Belgium, we have roads being split on two municipalities. They have to collaborate in order to work. So most of them want to collaborate in order to work efficiently, but they don't want their electors to know, because maybe they wouldn't like them to collaborate with someone from the other party, because in the other municipality, you have another party being in charge. So that's the usual case. Thank you.
That is clear. Thank you. Good example.
I've got a personal reflection. It's about, we have seen the explosion of ICO with the ERC 20. We have seen the explosion of traceability with the ERC 721. Now with the ERC 100, 1400, which is the STO. My point is maybe if we got a smart contract for IoT, it could be used for every developers to integrate simply this smart contract and maybe try to do connected objects. Actually, there aren't any protocol. There isn't many reflections about creating a smart contract about IoT. I don't know if anybody know an initiative about this.
What would be the specific need for that contract?
Like on the ERC, the main thing is to be sure that when you buy something, you get what you buy or something like that. For a smart contract for IoT, it will be a payable method to be assured that it is payable, and it might have other method because it's a physical things. Like if you get a car, there should be a method like is accident, is in repair, is repaired, or some methods more linked to physical goods. And maybe we could have the same effect like ICO or STO or traceability.
Just a short comment to what was mentioned before. I think you're right that creating like a standardized token can help, but then with ICOs and STOs, there is still strong financial incentive from the parties that are conducting these offerings, which maybe in terms of the token that you mentioned or new type of smart contract that you mentioned, we still will have to find what the financial incentive is, because in the ICO and STO case, it's crowdfunding, it's acquiring money for the project. So I think if we couple it with proper financial incentive, then it could work.
I like the idea that in the future we don't have everybody have one lawnmower or one goods of everything. It will be shared. So maybe you can be incentive in you are buying the goods. You put it with your neighbor and you get reward for the people use it. They can rate it if it's broken or if it's in good shape, or some kind of this usage. And I'm not sure there are a lot of development around this subject today.
Your microphone, Arno.
Sorry. Yeah. I'm not sure having some kind of generic smart contract is a good idea. For example, today you have one contract when you buy a car, you have one contract when you buy a house, you have one contract when you buy a Frigidaire. These kind of things, smart contract is the same. You will have many different smart contracts depending on what is your use case, and having only one for IoT, meaning that you will put all the use cases you want to cover into only one smart contract will be a nightmare to maintain at the end. This is why, for me, smart contracts have to be to consider, in fact, as really a view of your business when you want to register something in a blockchain. And this is really a virtual contract, a virtual mind of what you want to do before you register your assets inside the blockchain.
I agree, but my reflection is maybe like the ERC, they could be the first one with a massive adoption, and we can see the leak in this contract and build another one, because now we got 3 main smart contracts for financial assets, the fungible, the non-fungible, and with the layers. So, and as you say, when you got a smart contract for IoT, you need other kind of services like insurance, because if I rent my car to someone else without using Uber, I don't know, and the guy get an accident, how do we manage? So the smart contract of IoT should be linked with the smart contract of insurance, should be linked with the smart contract of payments. So my point is just if there was, excuse me, the first smart contract about IoT, it could start Just the first one, there aren't any smart contract actually. Maybe you got one with Ledger?
Within Ledger and within our project, yes, we have a specific smart contract, but for me, even this smart contract is open source. It's really dedicated to one use case with NG for green energy. And I'm pretty sure you will never be able to reuse what we have done with NG. This is why, for me, smart contract, yeah, you have many templates available on the web, link with the different tools you are able to use, in fact, to generate smart contract. But after, it's really how you want to do business between two entities, or how you want to do business with your customer in order to generate this token on a specific blockchain.
Do you think your smart contract will be the ERC20 of the smart grid, for example?
Yeah, we can consider that for our use case within our specific blockchain, which is Energy Web Foundation. Yes, why not? But after, for smart grid, you have other type of blockchain, other type of smart contract. May be difficult to have only one as a standard. It can be a template as an open source for people to understand what is inside, but for me, difficult to replicate, in fact.
So I think that what this opens up is really the topic of standardization, which is, of course, one of the major aspects. This is actually one thing that we will be coming back to later. I think that from the discussion I see here, there might be a need from some standardization in the IoT aspect that might be directly linked to smart contracts, but that might not be actually the priority if the level of customization that is needed for the smart contracts is too high. So just wanted to maybe close this discussion on the first aspect. Yeah, sure.
Well, before you close, let me just inject I'm from the IoT unit here in the Commission, and we have many projects on smart cities. We have many projects on smart energy, on health, on mobility, and a number of things, and quite a few with blockchain inside. What I notice in this discussion is a lot of interest and a lot of potential. And there is in that slide quite a few things which are very, very interesting, is to the notion of stocking, notarizing data, collect data from, what I don't like is users, because users is too close to the individual. There will be for some discussion on marketplaces and data lakes and things like that. Unfortunately, most of the studies shows today that the only data marketplace that exists is the marketplace for personal data, which is extremely sensitive and extremely frustrating because it doesn't work the way we should. When I heard you talking about incentivizing but forcing people to give up their data, I think you're going the wrong way. There may be things to scratch there, but this is not where things will happen. I think things will much more happen in other marketplaces. And there are some marketplaces which are starting to sort of emerge. They're not yet there. And the challenge, I think, is there. One of them is on energy, because as you mentioned, several of you mentioned, there's other incentive, and in particular, the legal incentive. And in the energy sector, there's a new regulation that forces operator of energy to give access to the data. So by legislation, they have to give access to the data. And then we come to that point of notarizing that data, making sure those who have access can access actually the data they think they're accessing. And there are many things. So look, I mean, with this similar mindset, there are many things which are happening. And I think the main thing that all this discussion should start from is defining use cases, real use cases, not things you work on your side because this is where you think your data will, your development will fit. It's more where there's actually a need to have a good development. And I think in the energy sector, in the health sector, in certain use cases of smart city is really too big as a concept. I mean, it covers 100,000 things, and we even too often have too simplistically discussion because we don't have good use cases in there. And I think that there may be several things. There was discussion a bit this morning about IoT and energy sector. There will be a workshop on marketplace for the energy sector. And I think you will be surprised to see that many things are happening. There will be new projects launched this year. We cannot talk about them yet because the contracts are not signed and they've just been selected, but there will be things on that domain also.
Yeah, so I just wanted to give an example of a concrete use case with the tangible goods, which is, by the way, out of the scope of smart cities, but it's a sector that I think it's very important and we didn't tackle it yet. It's the agri-food sector where blockchain can be really useful. So Carrefour, it's one of the supply chain big players that use blockchain, and in order to record all their transaction in the agri-food value chain, so from the production of the chickens until where they are stored in the shop. And this is an information that can go into a blockchain technology, and customers can benefit from and see where their food comes from. And it's also very useful where we think about any kind of animal or food disease, and we try to understand where it comes from. This can be a very good way of tracking it. And the difference, because a general comment, because we compared quite a lot of times database with blockchain, it's one of the features of the blockchain, which is, I think, very important, is the fact that we cannot erase, we cannot delete information. And this makes it much more transparent, which is not the case with the data set. And then, of course, the information is encrypted, which means that we can get rid of, in a way, first, human error of reporting, and second, even corruption.
Good afternoon, this is Zdeněk Pekarek.
Sorry, I cut you off.
Sorry, Zdeněk Pekarek, Invent Capital. I've been seeing in my professional life a lot of startups in Europe, successful ones and those not so much. And I think that the one thing that differentiates them is their sort of like how much they think about the real customer, meaning a person who doesn't want to be incentivized because they have already enough complexities in their daily lives. They want the things to just work. And I think that it's great to see the, sort of like us here in the room as professionals thinking how to make this happen for the customer. But ultimately, we should always come back to the thinking, how do we make it easier for the user, for the customer, so that their daily commute isn't filled with all the incentives and all the notifications and all the information, and instead it just flows naturally to them so that they don't need to worry about the sort of up-to-minute information, and instead they can focus on the key issues they see in their life instead of thinking about infrastructure problems. So that would be my proposition, that ultimately there should be a layer which would sort of like help actual users be sort of like not necessarily shielded away, but sort of guided through this complex solution so that they don't need to think about it.
I think that we all agree with that aspect. So this is the role really of the application layer. Here we are talking about the foundation bricks that could be leveraged. But of course, when we are talking about incentivization, we are not going to tell to the consumer that is being incentivized. We are just going to gamify what is being interacting with and simplifying it as much as possible so that even my grandmother can use that. But yes, definitely a very important aspect.
Let me add a concrete use case too, and I do like the split towards use cases like Chiara does. We have a project running live in several Belgium cities at the moment. We have put an IoT tracker inside the helmet of children. They bike to school when they pass an RFID reader. It's an RFID tag. When they pass an RFID reader, they get a coin straight in their wallet, which resides on the blockchain. and they can spend the coin at the local shop, at the local community, just a local currency actually. They can spend the coin in the swimming pool or on the local fair to have some fun. We use a blockchain merely for the transaction part of value, for the money, and we use the e-money license of Belfius Bank to have collateral on a bank account so that it's also possible to step out of the system. It's easy to make a coin. It's a little bit harder to get it refunded all the time, which is what we ensure. It's running live in several Belgium cities at the moment.
Thanks. That's actually an interesting use case. I think it's, sorry, I want to go back to the Carrefour use case because to me, that's a bit of a case of blockchain washing. I mean, as a consumer, if you want to go buy a chicken, for those who like, who consider chicken to be food, then like, how do you check that the chicken you're seeing is the one that's on the blockchain? There is absolutely no way of knowing. There's literally no way. I mean, you're not going to do a spectrograph analysis or DNA analysis of your chicken. It's not going to happen. And so because all the power to tell you what's happening is in the hands of one actor, which is in this case, the company doing the blockchain, there's no difference with a database. I mean, to me, because how the data is presented, it's by the company. How the data is entered, it's by people who are working for the company or have legal ties to the company. Who are running the nodes, it's the company. I mean, you can put as much transparency as you want into that. If there is no decentralization of that system, you've essentially got a nice, shiny, slow database.
Yes, maybe one last point on that aspect, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that maybe we should give some credit to the front runners to run some use cases in a very protected environment, which then may be rolled out later in a really decentralized way, because they have reasons to protect some interests as well. And I think we can learn from these use cases for later more decentralized applications.
I would say the whole point of blockchain is the decentralization, and running a demonstration without this essential part is not really an interesting example in this moment.
I thought it was trust and
So I think that the point is taken. I don't think that we are here to talk about specific cases and the interest of using blockchain for them specifically. But yes, we have to think about governance and how the solution makes sense in a decentralized fashion. To continue the discussion on more technical aspects, what we propose to you, switching directly to more interesting discussions, to other discussions, what I mean. So what I meant is that I skipped the slides to go directly to more interesting discussions. This is what I meant. Don't take me wrong. Basically what we got here, and the main objective here is to have a real analysis of what is happening and where there could be hurdles on the technical aspect. So very simple use case, the one of energy. We have been talking about it a lot actually today. And so the schemes flows pretty simply. You have here energy that is produced by solar panels. This energy will be collected and monitored through IoT sensors. Of course, you can add layers such as the ones that are presented this morning in order to make sure that there is a cryptographic link between the energy that is produced and the energy that goes into the marketing, goes into the network. And what you are actually doing is that you are leveraging blockchain for some parts of notarization and making sure, like it was presented this morning, that there is absolutely no double spend into the energy that is produced and that is branded as green energy. So this is the first use of blockchain here. First step, you have the solar panels, of course, IoT that comes into place, and the blockchain for notarization. This is the first step. The second step will be to, in the context of smart grids, you want to allocate that energy that has been produced to the people who first need it, and the people who actually, you want to distribute it in a way that is the most sensible, the most efficient, and the most cost efficient. And so what you are going to do is that you can leverage data about the real world, what is happening today, For example, what is the temperature outside? Is it very hot? And then you will predict that a lot of air conditioning will be used today, or is it a pretty cool day? And based on this real-time information that is coming out of the IoT sensors, plus historic data that could be also notarized through the blockchain, you are going to do analysis and prediction through artificial intelligence. Of course, on purpose, I'm not going to precise what type of artificial intelligence is used here, but basically it's an algorithm that will be trying to solve the issue of what is the consumption right now, what is the consumption I can predict in the next hours, and am I going to allocate this energy right now, or is it better to store it for later because there is not a lot of consumption at the moment? So you do prediction and analysis. And after that, based on this analysis, you are going to allocate the energy, taking, of course, into account the preferences of the consumer. So, for example, if the consumer says that he wants at least 60% of the energy coming into his household to be from renewable energy, this will be taken into account in the market and in the decision-making into allocating the energy. And finally, the two last elements where there is collaboration between the three technologies, IoT, AI, and blockchain, is in the transfer of energy. Like we said before, blockchain is great to make payments and make micropayments, transfer value. So what you are going to do is while you transfer the energy and that the energy is used by the consumer, you are going to proceed to micropayments with the direct payments based on the actual consumption and not any forecasted consumption. The final element that is here and that is leveraging both AI and blockchain, with artificial intelligence, you can detect malfunctions into some of your solar farms. So for example, you have a few solar panels that have been damaged, or a few solar panels that are currently dirty. And this artificial intelligence could help identify the malfunctions into these devices and create by itself a maintenance bounty, which is basically a contract. Hey, who wants to go and fix my solar panels? And this marketplace with bounties could be used through blockchain. Of course, most of what you can see here doesn't exist today or exist in partial elements. And this is a vision of what could happen in the future. I know that we are here to discuss about what is actually here, but just to project ourselves into what could happen. And of course, there might be other bricks that are not in this element. I just want to ask you 4 questions. And these 4 questions are the following. In the first case, where we see here that there is electricity production, and this production is measured by IoT sensors. This comes up with the production of a lot of data, because you can say that there are a lot of solar panels, a lot of different energy sources. And so this is a lot of data to handle. How are you going to manage scalability with these high volumes? For energy, of course, we can argue that actually it's not that much to handle, but if we go in any other IoT use case, the scalability problem will come back. Second issue, what do you do with privacy about this historic data that has been put on chain? What have you actually put on chain, and what are the privacy layers that you have added to protect this data and making sure that no data about consumers are being stored on chain? And 2 last questions: how to ensure interoperability, because if you are using data about what is happening here in the real world and you want to use this data, you are going to have to be able to understand this data with data that could be coming from many different sources, and in the future sources that you have maybe never interacted with before or not contracted directly with. So how do you ensure interoperability? And final question, how do you manage this decentralized marketplace, and what are the essential elements that you need to add into this marketplace in order to be able to work? So one example is the one of identity. in order to make sure that the people who are able to repair your solar panels are actually accredited and have a track record of good repairs, and you can be leveraging that information. So 4 questions. We can go in the flow with the scalability first. And again, this is a simple use case just to illustrate it and serve as a basis for the discussion. So the floor is yours, please. Scalability, is that actually a problem? How do you solve it? How do you make sure that all this data coming from IoT is actually being handled?
As I said during my presentation, I think it's really important to do some pre-processing on the edge. So to have infrastructure in order to be able to pre-process data before sending them inside the central data centers, for example. So edge computing will be one of the answer.
So maybe could you please explain what you mean by...
So pre-processing is like we have 1 gigabit of data every second. So for sure we can't store it, and we can't send it easily. So how to be able to do some computation near the sensors in order to send the result of the computation, like cleaning the data or executing training an AI on the edge, so near the sensors and not inside the data centers.
I think there's another answer which is playing to the strength of a blockchain. So a blockchain is slow to retrieve data, but it's good for integrity. So don't put as little data as you need on the blockchain, and just keep proofs that the data stored elsewhere is valid. So, you know, hashes of data, like a Merkle tree or a hash that will show you that the data that is stored in some other place, which could be a decentralized file system or a centralized database, is valid and hasn't changed. And that also answers part of the second question, which is, how do you do privacy layers? I think there's a very good answer in the Sovereign project that is using blockchains to do the self-sovereign identity. Their conclusion is, don't put any personal data on the blockchain, period. Stop. Just don't put any. So that way you solve the whole problem of private data, and all you keep is references to data that is elsewhere. And so you know the data you see is valid, but you don't have problems of immutability of personal data because it's elsewhere and you can always remove it.
So I think it's important to not consider blockchain as a storage solution. So I agree with you. And for that, off-chain computing, it's a really, really efficient scalability answer.
So am I correct to assume that actually managing scalability with blockchain, even though if we know that they are slow, is not an issue today that would prevent us from applying this use case today? Is that correct? Because you can actually just notarize data, and you don't need so much data when you actually are notarizing it and processing it off-chain.
Yeah, perhaps one remark, because you didn't draw big data and data aspects, because you have lots of cases where you have to manage million of entry every second. So I say 100 million information. And you have specific infrastructure which is not linked to blockchain. So this is really the food for AI on big data. You have specific technology like Spark or other stuffs, and this is not, it was to avoid making confusion. There is here the final purpose is to make prediction on the consumption of electricity and production also. So the real target is really using AI algorithm to really manage this, and blockchains, if really the first target is optimizing consumption and production, this is the first solution will not be with blockchain. You will first manage it via big data and AI, and then based on decision you want to take after, like redirecting your production of energy or opening some things, then you can use blockchain for this kind of things. But I'm not sure if for making all the first step, the AI analysis, blockchain is not necessarily needed at that step. After, yes, but it was a remark.
Okay. So a preliminary step before the treatment in notarization on blockchain. Okay, yeah, sure.
Just one point you have to consider when you are speaking about IoT in general, it's not millions of data per second. because most of the sensors in IoT are autonomous sensor, meaning they are in place for 10 years, reading the value, for example, on an electric meter in an autonomous mode, sending maybe a very low quantity of data, because if you are looking, for example, the network used today for IoT, you are able to send 12 bytes of data every hours, which means it's very low in terms of quantity of data. Even LoRa, when you are speaking about LoRa network, it's 46 bytes you can send, and you have to send it every hours. For sure, if we are in a room like that, you are connected to a Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, and you are able to have a power provided by the building, you can send data every seconds. But in IoT, no need to that. For example, on our project, it's one time per hour, we are looking what is the production of energy, and we have to be very conscious on the consumption of the device, because the device is fully autonomous and need to be in place for the next 10 years. Meaning scalability is an issue for some of the data, but for other, we are managing low quantity of data. And to be back to what was said, the topic, which is the zero knowledge proof, is something very important to say that we are able to sign a set of data, to store it in a decentralized, for example, file place, and to just store a signature and a hash in the blockchain in order to avoid to store the full data. And this zero knowledge proof, for example, on health market is very important, because you don't want to...
Excuse me to interrupt. Can you please explain what zero knowledge proof is for maybe some people who don't know?
It's what I was saying. You get all the information from your sensor. You just sign this information with what we call a hash, and you just register, in fact, the hash and the identity of the device, which is, for example, the information. Meaning in the blockchain, you are just able to say that this point, this oracle, have in fact signed a set of data, and this set of data is not registered in the blockchain, but in a separate system. It was mentioning just before a decentralized file system, this kind of stuff, where you can retrieve the data in another way. And for health, for example, most of the people don't want from their home to send their health information and to store it publicly in the blockchain. It's not something they want to do. It's something they want to avoid, and just people authorized can access this kind of information.
Well, I swear I didn't know your slide when I made my previous comment, but I think that the questions are well chosen, and if I say that is because this is exactly the question we have asked to the large-scale pilots we wanted to select, and we wanted them to actually come forward with answers to this kind of questions. First of all, by defining what were for them the key performance indicator, in particular, giving ideas of dimension, depending on the use cases, then the amount of data to be processed and number of characteristics will be different. Where do they want to go? And that was, so on the left part, that's what I was mentioning in my previous remark, in a sense. And on the right part is one of the use case, which is very much consumer-oriented. Those who are more interested by the smart grid point of view, which is then the production view of that, they still have until tomorrow to submit their proposal for other large-scale pilots on big data, which are addressing the other part of this kind of issue with exactly the same kind of questions. And I think back to your question, is scalability an issue or not? I think the question is still out. And what these large-scale projects will give us is what kind of actual scalability do they need at the large-scale deployment for them? Do they need to move from the small use cases to millions of transactions per day, or do they want to have things which are more robust and fast, less transaction but faster? It depends, but those questions have to be answered.
Okay, great. So I'm glad that we almost solved the first issue, which is the one of scalability, demystifying actually how much data is produced and how much data you need on the blockchain. So I'm glad we did that. Maybe to move on to the other topics, if I may. We don't have a lot of time left, so let's move on that quickly. So on privacy, we were talking about different layers. Yes, please.
I was just curious whether you know what's in terms of volume and speed of blockchain. Do you know what has actually achieved the best sort of speed and volume at the moment in terms of basically transactions? Because I do know, like in Australia, the stock exchange clearing and settlement system now, I think, is which I used to supervise. I think they're testing it at 100,000 transactions a second. But I was just curious whether you've been aware of, or anyone's aware of, whether there's more faster scalable examples or not. Just a little bit to this question, I guess, in terms of energy. It's the one that I know as a market regulator, but I'm just curious.
So maybe to answer to that question briefly, so what we are seeing right now is that most of the scalability on blockchain projects is not actually coming from the blockchains, but is coming from layer 2 solutions. And what we mean by that is that you have the blockchain protocol that is running. If you want it to run on a very decentralized way, there is no magic. It will be slow. And so this layer, from a public perspective, will run with tens of transactions per second, or maybe hundreds of transactions per second. If you go into something that is less centralized, you can go higher. You can go to about 1,000, in thousands transactions per second. But actually, if you want to reach more scalability, you will have these layer 2 solutions. And these layer 2 solutions are actually described in one of our last paper that we produced by that were produced by the Observatory and Forum. So I would invite you to go there, but maybe very quickly, you have solutions that allow you to almost have unlimited scalability on that aspect. You just have to make sure that you both take into account the transaction throughput, which is how many transactions per second you can process on average, and the finality. So in how much time these transactions will be actually stored on the chains, which can be a bit tricky and depends on implementations. So yeah, to answer your question, it depends. And for the details, I would invite you to have a read on this paper, which is on the website of the Observatory. There's a bit of self-promotion for the Observatory. Privacy, maybe? No? Okay, so if there are no more remarks on privacy, I propose to move on to the next one, because actually privacy has been a bit discussed before. Don't put sensitive data on chain. It's actually the exact same answer than the issue on privacy. You are going to process everything off chain and just put the proofs on the blockchain. The third aspect, which was interoperability. So is the current standardization ecosystem around data that you can share from IoT devices sufficient to make this use case happen, or are there interoperability measures from an IoT perspective, but also maybe from a blockchain perspective that could slow the implementation of this use case?
Yeah, so I do not believe in one standard. In computing, we have seen that there is standards for a lot of use case, and we have a lot of choice of standards, and it normally shouldn't run like that. So I think it will be the same for blockchain, it will be the same for IoT. What is interesting is that we have a solution to, for example, blockchain to be able to connect a private blockchain or blockchain of consortium to public blockchain that are more and more decentralized. Parity is working on different projects. One of them will be Polkadot in a couple of months. We'll have a solution in order to connect private blockchain to public blockchain or to other private blockchain, and to have possibility to manage the authorization of putting information or collaboration. And for IoT, if I don't see that we will reach a standard for the hardware part, so maybe we have to find some layer of interoperability. And also in that topic, blockchain could be useful. For the use case I've presented, we were able to make robots, autonomous vehicles, collaborate together, even with different type of hardware. And it was possible because they were communicating through 5G to the blockchain and validating through a wide list the access of other robots.
Thank you.
In terms of interoperability, I think it will be possible per market. In fact, if you look, for example, for the car, the automotive market, today you have the V2X standard, which is defining how a car will discuss with another car, what are the kind of information they will exchange, how the car will discuss with the road, with the lights, with all these kind of things. This is a kind of initiative, but specifically for the automotive market. If you look more generally, you have the M2M Alliance, which is now, I think, one M2M under the ETSI standardization, which is working on other data sets. And you have also, for example, the mobile operators through their association, the GSMA association, that is working through another data set. Meaning that, yeah, it depends who will deliver you the information and which market you will target. Having a global interoperability, I think it can be a dream for me and very difficult to achieve because each market will have its own standard.
I think even in one field, it will be difficult to have one standard for the vehicles. We won't have a standard when we'll have a Chinese vehicle in the European market, for example. And so I think we have to anticipate these different standards and to have an interoperability layer on top of those different standards.
The MIT published a paper last year on design philosophy for interoperability in blockchain systems. Has anyone had a look at that? And it is, of course, it's quite similar, I have to say, to the European interoperability framework in terms of some of the layers that they are addressing. So I'd be very interested to know if any of you has been looking into that. Thank you. And I read that a few months ago, Accenture managed to achieve interoperability between two blockchains. I don't have the technical details, but I'm very interested in interoperability.
We are actually doing that. It's called. We are doing that with financial assets. It's called a bridge. A bridge allows you to discuss between two blockchains. A bridge is the secure part you put on the top of multi-blockchain, and it secure your data that when it being transferred from one blockchain to the other, it's in a secure way. So the
Could I just ask that, is that essentially an abstraction layer? Is that what you're doing?
Exactly. We are doing for STO because you can have a private blockchain with your own goods on STO and you want to merge with another blockchain with other STO. And we put a bridge among these two blockchains to be able to discuss. We don't use this for IoT things. It's mostly financial.
Thank you.
Basically, interoperability is a problem that is being solved. There are currently solutions, and again, promotion for the Observatory. Actually, the paper on scalability is also a paper on interoperability and sustainability. So there are some answers on how to achieve that and what are current solutions that are actually in production and usable in order to make interoperability between the two. So I think that on that aspect, what I hear from you is that actually these issues that we see here from the scalability and privacy, which have actually the same solution to the interoperability problem, which is actually being solved by industry. There is no major hurdle that is currently blocking us from moving forward and making sure that this vision of the future is happening. So for the last discussion, we would like to have a discussion on what is needed to make it happen faster if these blocks are not actually real hurdles.
So I think we just identify that there is some technical hurdles, but nothing that we cannot overcome with some research and few years of waiting. But we would like to take a step back, and because we think it's also important to discuss what could be the action plan for accompany this evolution, this convergence. So it will come, and it's very difficult because it's a prospective discussion. We're not sure about the way that this three technology will combine. We had some ideas, but it can still evolve in a completely different way. So we would like to discuss how to accompany with this free topic: monitoring, accompany, and safeguarding. So the first one is monitoring. Will for us cover two aspects. The first one is identify the priority industry, and I think we identify a few of priority use case during the day. I put smart city and energy, but we also talk about finance, smart agriculture. I don't know if there is other massive use case that we had forget, but it's also identifying the pitfall and the derive who could emerge from this technology. And this is a very difficult part because as we don't know what will be the form of the convergence, it's difficult to identify what could be the derives. So there is a data protection that has been talked about. We also talk about the governance issue, the fact that if we don't anticipate the question of the governance, it can be a massive hurdle in the evolution of the project. Or I heard some people talking about the liability in case of autonomous agent who could evaluate on a decentralized IoT system. So do you have any other idea of pitfalls that could happen if we see the convergence realizing, and we should anticipate and maybe accompany with safeguards? It's an open discussion. We just gave some examples. Yeah.
Well, there is something that hasn't been really mentioned so far, at least not using this term. If you rely on people's data and you monetize people's data, some people will need that money to basically make a living on a day-to-day basis, and it'll become part of the way they live. And basically, they will not be sharing the data freely, but they will be sharing the data because they have to, because they're poor, which is what some people are calling the privacy tax, which is if you have enough means, you can avoid giving your private data and you keep your privacy. If you are poor, you don't have enough money to do that, so you have to sell your data and you lose your privacy. So I think that's one of the big questions we should be asking in the background of a lot of these use cases, which is often it's not actually the company's data or it's not the municipality's data, it's people's, the data represents who they are. And so there are real fundamental freedom questions in how you use that data and how you ensure that the choice and the consent they give to use their data is a real, freely given choice and real consent, and not just the result of economic constraints.
Yeah, I very agree. I think on more broad picture, on the ethical side, there is probably many questions that this convergence will raise and that we need to anticipate and think like the one you just said. There is any other one that you have in mind? Ethical is not inspiring a lot of people.
A very good point. And this is a bit of a broader vision, but if we want to ensure data privacy or such questions about people being poor, selling their data, we need to have those companies collecting and operating data within our countries. I mean, if those are companies from the outside, we have almost no leverage at all to control them, almost. I know the Europe has been, with GDPR mainly, has been tackling the problem, but it's still a little bit difficult. So my point is the following. Why do people give away their private data? Not because they get incentivized with money, but with services, mainly Google, Facebook, and so. And something Europe has not addressed yet. I mean, the European Commission has taken lead, very good project. There's still something lacking, fun. Actually, most people give away their data for fun services, not for serious services, not for Google Maps. I give away my data mainly for Instagram, Snapchat, and so. And at the moment, local governments and European Commission, as I know, they put money into serious projects, but they don't put money into entrepreneurs trying just to put on a game or social media or whatever is fun and would attract people. Thank you.
Thank you. And to come back to the action plan and what could be done. So if you have a look on the financial area, a lot of regulators just frame some sandboxes where startups can have fun money or can really develop their business, but they don't have to follow all the regulations. And I think since we should have a positive mindset and develop something and not say, well, it's bad and it could be bad, and so don't do anything. So perhaps really give some sandboxes where startups can develop there, give them money and look what's coming out, and don't take the goals too high. So frame some projects which are in a local area working there, and incentivize to converge those technologies together. And afterwards, like an MVP, and look at what comes out, and then take the next steps.
Yeah, so I think regulation is an interesting part, even if it's a bit too early when we talk about the convergence, for asking if there is existing regulation that should be removed. Like Ken told us this morning, maybe all this centralized regulation by one label person should be adapted to the fact that now we have decentralized or distributed way of operate. But it's true that also many people already consider all the regulatory hurdle who could block at the really beginning the innovation, except if you have sandbox or I don't know other way to try to launch your project without facing a barrier who exists because the regulation is sometimes not fitted to the way the technology operates. For example, centralized regulation based on transparency and non-transparency, when you actually have a technology will bring transparency. So I completely agree. Yeah.
So we are thinking about how to fund research and maybe some startups and so on. But I would propose that we also think about the regulators themselves, because I mean, regulators are fairly well-established entities. That means that sometimes they have a well-established set of skills, and these skills might not always include digital skills, advanced digital skills, which would be able to sort of which would equip them with ability to sort of react with updates to regulation. So I would maybe suggest when I look at encouraging European initiatives, that we don't think just about funding research and startups, or even digital infrastructure like physical wires and wireless hotspots and so on, but that we also think about this, let's say, soft infrastructure, meaning regulators and people who are in charge of ensuring that those startups understand in what environment they are supposed to act, and they can sort of so. To summarize, it might be good to think about how to create an environment which would help those startups, not just with funding, but also with information, including regulatory-related information.
So I think this is a great example. Are there other elements that you think would help foster innovation in that aspect? We were talking about funding. and research. Of course, this is not the only one. You gave an example, and I think that today it's a good opportunity to think about it and propose innovative ways, or more importantly, proven ways that actually work. So if you have any elements to raise, yes, please.
Yeah, just to give another example of European initiative of the European digital hubs, that it's also apart from the sandbox, another initiative that helps SMEs and startups to test their new solution. Maybe the only thing is that the awareness it's not really raised around this initiative, or not so much well known. Probably because it's still in development, and there is a lot of new digital European hubs to be still established in other European cities, not only focused on UK and Germany and France. But it's something that definitely I think will help them.
In terms of next steps, two really important research questions that I think should be considered. One is a very focused study on the known economic and social benefits from where one or two or even three of advanced technologies have converged. I mean, a smart city example is one area where it may have converged and benefits realized, real economic benefits, savings, and also new revenues. And the second part is might be a sector-specific study on what strategies or missions that are pharmaceutical-specific, that are aged care-specific, that are traffic or urban mobility-specific, so sector-specific studies on what benefits have been realized and how, I think could give legitimacy and strength to the whole movement. I can't hear, sorry.
And who should be in charge of this study? Who should impulse this kind of study for evaluate the benefits?
Sorry, who would?
I think that the question here is who is most the best suited to answer these two questions. Is it, for example, the industry? Is it should it be impulsed by government initiatives? Should it be impulsed by initiatives such as the Observatory? Who are the best?
Yeah, I think commissioning the work could come from the Observatory or the European Commission itself, and the people answering the question, I think it would be most powerful if industry and academia came together and used data sets from the public and private sector and said something very powerful and very solid.
Okay. Other comments? Oh.
Just a comment to the previous comment. I think we saw today that there is a lot of proof of concepts and we are moving past that, but I think it's very, very early to conduct any economic impact assessment. We're most of the proof of concepts don't even have like completely developed business model with revenue model. So I think this can happen after it has been implemented on a large scale. So I'm from academia, so that's why I'm commenting on that.
I guess the conclusion is a bit we should wait that the technology and the convergence evolve in HR side and converge slowly, and in some time maybe continue to observe and to accompany at some distance, and when we'll see real application starting, real large-scale application, conduct all this measure, study, and okay. A last question maybe after our last comment. And after Ludovic will conclude.
I just think the approach that's foreseen anyway at the highest level with the Commission is to AI proof, blockchain proof all the adopting areas, and also with ISO on standardization, they're just doing the minimal standards work. So they are taking that approach of letting the technology develop, I think, a little bit more and just proofing things first of all before acting too much, to allow some experimentation to happen, to allow these things to develop. So I think they're doing good job so far of addressing these things. So maybe that's a good point to stop.
Yeah, I was going to say, as I guess a former market regulator, I think the general approach is right. I think that, and the Chinese do this, which is, it's too small to really care, but then it becomes too big to ignore. And I think, and if you want to be in a competitive world, then, it's probably better not to regulate first and ask questions later. Otherwise, you kill competition. So, but at the same time, you've got to make sure that you have basic safety in mind if it's an issue of consumers. And I think that's the general approach, frankly.
So find a right balance between observing and putting safeguard, but not regulating because it's way too early.
Correct. I mean, one of the areas that I think people should be thinking about a lot more, though, is competition policy is a huge emerging issue in I guess this whole world at the moment. It's sort of the issue of a lack of level playing field is a big issue that's starting to emerge. So you've got to be careful with it. You're not too slow either.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you all for all your input. I think, Ludovic, you want to say a word of conclusion for thanking you for all these discussions?
Yeah, sure. And I promise I will be brief so that you can exchange between each other after that, maybe network also. These events are also made for that. So thank you very much for joining us today. It was a pleasure having this discussion. I think that what I take the most out of today's discussion is that actually the main conductor of all discussions was data. How do we process data? How do we use these different technologies in order to add value to this data, in order to secure it, in order to make it interact with real-world applications. And when we looked more specifically into the technical aspects, actually we saw that today there is no major technical hurdle that prevents us from making today very innovative use cases happen in smart cities or in other use cases. So these are other elements that are today preventing us. And these elements that were discussed were, for example, the aspects of governance, the aspects of getting business models right and getting incentives right, that are maybe a bit more tricky and not solved today, which actually comes in handy because the next topic of the Observatory and Forum, which will actually be on governance and new organizational challenges. So this is one very important aspect that we will be covering and maybe trying to unlock the full solution to make all this future happen. So I'm looking forward to see some of you during our next workshops, starting in April with this one. Thank you very much for joining us again today. Thank you for your interactions. This is very important. You are the experts in the room, and we are getting inputs from you, and we are making these conversations together. So thanks a lot, and see you soon.